Good morning, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. Welcome to the third day of the fall celebration of the 2020 Wisconsin Book Festival. I am delighted to be joined this morning by Claire Messud and Meg Wolitzer. Sorry. She told me I could say either, but I want to thank Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation. Their support of free cultural events for the last 8 years, but particularly over the last 8 months throughout the pandemic, has been absolutely unwavering. And it is so important that we gather, however we're gathering today, to be together and celebrate wonderful writing being done all over the country. I want to welcome people from all across Wisconsin, but also all across the nation and all across the world. One of the few benefits of the pandemic has really been that we can reach people wherever they are. So we're joined by Claire Messud today here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Meg Wolitzer in New York City. And I'm here in Madison, and so hello to you wherever you are. We have 8 events throughout the day today. Wonderful things. Jennifer Palmieri, Layla Lalami, Paula Ramos, Andre Asaman, Kelly Jo Ford, Brian Green, Jana Levine, and Terry Tempest Williams. So we hope that you will stay with us over the next 12 hours while we do back-to-back events, and I will be here the whole time. I will just very briefly say we are honored today to be hosting 2 of the best writers writing today. Meg Wolitzer, the author of The Female Persuasion, which you can see behind me, but also The Interestings and many, many other novels, and perhaps some more forthcoming. But also Claire Messud, whose book Kant's Little Prussian Head and Other Reasons That I Write gives us the reason to come together today, and also gives us many reasons that we should be writing. We also may know her from her novels The Emperor's Children and multiple others. She is also a teacher, and we are very, very, very glad to have her here today. Thank you so much for being here. I will turn it over to you, and I'll see you in about an hour.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is wonderful to be here. Claire is one of my favorite writers, and I thought that before I say anything or interrogate her at all, that I would ask you, Claire, to read a just very small amount to give readers a little dip into the book.
Sure, absolutely. I just want to say thank you, Meg. It is so wonderful to be here with you. My only sorrow is that we are not in the same room, but hopefully before long we will have. It may not return to exactly, but we will have something. Yeah. So this book, just to explain, is a book. The subtitle is an autobiography and essays. Half of the essays are personal and half of them are critical. And for me, I think I'm somebody for whom my reading has so much shaped who I am and how I think, and that I think of books as experiences, kind of like life. But I thought I would read a little bit from a personal essay, which is about my grandparents and their world. And my father was French, so it probably makes sense to say that. And I'll just read a couple pages. Growing up, my sister and I went every year to stay with our French grandparents in Toulon. Their apartment was on the highest floor of a 4-story building in a gated compound on top of a cliff on the outskirts of town, with a roof terrace and enormous windows looking out to sea. There we would run wild with a gang of summer kids, clambering down the cliff path to the beach, carving our initials in the aloes on the way, shouting Marco, Polo for hours in the pool, irritating the matrons with their careful breaststroke, and sunning ourselves on its slatted deck. After dinner, we would gossip and flirt by the big tree on the stone plaza, or race around in games of hide and seek along the leafy pathways, our sandal slaps echoing on the concrete. Our grandparents' world was one of immovable routines into which we kids slipped easily. Meals fell at religiously allotted times, lunch at 12:30 sharp, supper at 8 p.m. with an aperitif hour beforehand. And the rituals of their preparation were like the postprandial sieste, sacrosanct. Over breakfast, our grandfather planned the day's menus for lunch and dinner, recorded in tiny meticulous script in a spiral notebook. We could look up what had been eaten on a particular date years previously. He departed for market by 8 a.m. carrying his list. In childhood, we would accompany him to the butcher, the baker, and finally the bar tabac to buy the day's newspapers, magazines for our grandmother, and cigarettes for our aunt. He shunned the nearest grocer after she asked him to pay for parsley, which was not done, and ever after made a detour for vegetables and milk. Upon his return, Odette, the housekeeper, almost our second aunt, laid out the groceries and set about cooking lunch, the day's main meal, always 3 courses, while our grandfather retreated to his study upstairs to read and to write. Our grandmother, meanwhile, elegantly gaga from early on, was arranged, beautifully dressed, coiffed, and maquillée by Odette like a precious doll, in an armchair by the dining room window where she could gaze out at the infinite, always changing sea, or look down at the electric blue swimming pool, or put on her glasses and pretend to read the magazine placed in her lap. In the late morning, around 11, Odette brought her a tray bearing a little crystal glass of Coca-Cola fortified with blood from a raw steak to keep up her strength and hopefully to ward off what were mysteriously referred to as her malaise. My sister and I were free to roam with our friends morning and afternoon. We were not required to lie down after lunch the way the old people did in sepulchral silence, the metal blinds lowered against the Mediterranean glare, though we were asked not to swim for an hour after eating for fear that we might suffer an unspecified attack and drown. It was requested only that we appear for lunch properly dressed, that we help clear the table and do the dishes, and that we resurface just before cocktail hour to help lay out the little bowls of pretzels and nuts and to set the table for supper. I'll stop there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, I got like hearing that, the detail of the Coca-Cola glass with a little bit of blood. Like, I feel like, oh, that made you a novelist right there, right?
Well, I think the thing that is, I do think that one of the things, so they were French, but we grew up, my mother was Canadian. We grew up in a bunch of different places, but always English speaking places. So I feel that a lot of my life has been kind of slipping in like an undercover spy and then trying to fit in and trying to pretend that I'm not a misfit. So to try to pretend, you got to be a quick study. You got to notice the things. And I feel that there's this weird thing that much of my life was about, I mean, really, well into my 30s, I would say, was about trying not to seem different from everybody else around me. And then at some point being sort of mildly baffled and outraged that nobody could see that I was that I had these differences, that I was a weirdo. So anyway, but just to say, I think it does make you a novelist when you're sort of forced to notice things,
it's sort of like they're magnetic filings that stick to you, right? If you're a writer, and that's how you tell if you're a writer, because they stick to you and you obsess about them, even though you don't know their meaning. Like what? Like, why did you know that was such a great detail to put in?
Well, I remember as a kid thinking it was really weird and a little bit gross. And I mean, I would see Odette in the kitchen would literally be like smushing the steak to get the juice out of it, the blood out of it, and then pouring it with a little.
It seems to me it's like the combination of the two make it more than if it was just the blood. It's the combination of the sort of mundane and the frightening in one little goblet that sort of, for me, does it.
Just everything about, and like, I think my grandmother probably didn't know.
Right.
I just thought she was having a glass of Coca-Cola. And like at that point, what else could you put in the Coca-Cola? That
maybe that's true for us all. God knows what we've eaten and drunk over our lives, right? Who knows? But I mean, I think that this book, I really love it so much. It's erudite and personal and deeply enjoyable. And I had the experience. I mean, you and I, like so many writers, I consider you my friend, but we've barely spent time together, and we passed like those ships on the book tour night. But I feel as if I did get to know you better reading this. And I also weirdly felt as if you were getting to know me, because I was practically speaking aloud to the text saying, oh, yes, I know just what you mean. Or, yes, I read those same writers in my childhood. And, oh, yes, I loved SRA cards too. But I was then struck by this quote that you include from Nabokov. About believing that part of the magic of the written is that the writer, well, this is a paraphrase, is that the writer and the reader climb the mountain from opposite sides to meet at the top. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, I think look, I can't tell you what he meant exactly because I didn't.
What does it mean to you?
But what it means to me is that, if you're watching a film, everything has been created and you are a sort of passive consumer of it. but you can't be a passive consumer of reading, in part because you're more actively engaged in it, right? You've got to turn the pages, but also because the words have different meanings for each of us, and those are meanings that come from all our life experiences and everything we read and how we understand the world. So if I say family, that brings with it a whole lot of stuff that's my stuff, and if you say family, that brings stuff that's your stuff. So if you read on the page family or love or any of these words, you're experiencing the text in a way that's informed by the life that and the person that you are, which in some way overlaps with other people's experiences, hopefully, but isn't the same. It's entirely yours.
Yeah, it reminds me of, in a sense, the fallaciousness of psychoanalysis, the idea being that there would be this neutral figure who would listen to what you said with what Freud called evenly hovering attention. But in fact, that analyst had his or her own family trauma and stories and is bringing it to that. I kind of feel like that's a good analogy for reading the novel. We can pretend that we are blank and simply open to, there was that line by Updike about reviewing, submit to the spell of the story, however weak or strong, that the reader, the critic, needs to just sort of submit. But I think in our submission, there is a certain amount of activity, without a doubt.
And that's actually a thing that I love, right?
Me too.
It's so, it means that there's this openness or this space in reading, this freedom for your own version of things, which isn't necessarily true with some other art forms,
No, it leaves room in a way because of the evocative nature of what fiction does, I think, in a way that other things don't leave as much room, because we all grow up with the idiom of writing and speaking. That may not be true for music. It may not be true for other forms, painting, but it is true that through words and our mind processes and images, etc. What can you explain to our viewers the title, which is such a great title? When I first agreed to do this, I didn't know what this was. And I was like, okay, I'm game. What is she up to now? So tell us, what are you up to now?
What am I up to now? Well, in fact, the collection includes pieces from over sort of 20 years of writing, and along with writing fiction, I've done a fair amount of reviewing, writing about books and writing some personal essays. So in fact, it isn't a book that I sort of sat down and wrote in the last 2 years or anything. But it also isn't everything. Thank God for everyone. It isn't everything that I wrote over the past 20 years. And I made a selection of things in the books, and there's some pieces about artists. Those are pieces that really were meaningful to me, that were particularly where the book, the book or the writer or the artwork somehow I feel is part of my understanding of the world. It particularly spoke to me or changed the way I saw the world. I mean, I think I include a review of Magda Szabo's novel, The Door, which really changed my thinking about how to live. I mean, it's but the title comes from, it's actually from Thomas Bernhardt, the very grumpy Austrian writer, who rants about things, and one of his rants is about how everything basically gets lost. And he says, all of Kant, all the great work of Kant is kind of reduced to he says, Kant's little East Prussian head. I dropped the East in the title because I thought, it's Kant's little East Prussian head. And then he says a so-called philosophical hue. And he's basically saying, the communication, and it's true, it is like standing in a rainstorm with your hands out trying to catch all the water. Language is imperfect. Comprehension is imperfect. People are impatient. I think I say in the piece that I have a friend who's a philosopher who spent 30 years of her life on one passage of Kant, and I feel like, and is still, is still working on it, is still figuring out exactly what she feels it means. And so, but we could do that in any day, right? You could just say, I'm gonna write exactly everything that happened this morning, and between 9 and noon, and you could have an 800-page novel
Well,
potentially.
do you think that's true for, I mean, it's a loaded question because I think I know the answer, but is that true for fiction too? Do we sort of have one or two arias to sing that we are sort of singing again and again in a way, like your friend, sort of working on
Yeah.
one passage? Yeah. Are you doing that in a sense in your fiction?
You know, I like to think not, but probably
Well,
I am.
right. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, no, we don't say I'm going to write one just like that last one. No, I don't mean your books are all like one another. I certainly don't mean that. But I'm wondering if we all have a sort of project in mind, perhaps even subconsciously, that we are working out.
Yeah, I mean, I do often, especially in these times when I feel there's so much noise in the world, right? There's so much noise in the world, and when one's ears and eyes grow tired, and I think it was Wittgenstein said something like all philosophy is neurosis, right? So like if we weren't neurotic, we would just be quiet, and so I do think why am I compelled to keep as it were worrying with words to keep writing and recording things and I think that is that is when I'm feeling kind of serene, I say it is my calling, but I feel like, or maybe it's just my neurosis.
Your neurosis calling, yes.
Yeah, it's my neurosis.
One thing that I've always been really interested in your work, and it is in this collection as well, in this book as well, which is your writing about being young, about children and adolescents. And we sort of live in a time when, at least in terms of fiction, and this is not fiction, but in terms of fiction, if you were to write a book about a 12-year-old, like one of my favorite novels, and you glancingly refer to this writer who's referred to, and I take issue with her reference, Jane Bowles refers to Carson McCullers, and I'm an enormous Carson McCullers fan, and I think The Member of the Wedding is a really brilliant classic novel that should be read much more, and it has a lot to say about racism. But Frankie Adams is 12 years old, and people would publish it as YA, etc. But you're spending a lot of time here wonderfully about your sort of peripatetic childhood and adolescence, moving with your family from the US to Australia, your summers with with relatives going to France and Toronto, all this stuff. As a child and a child's perceptions, what's the power of that, do you think?
I think, I mean, I can say jokingly that the most interesting experiences I had when before I was 12 years old. So there's partly that, like, I think I had a sort of weird childhood that way.
Yeah.
A lot of, but I think, but it is also true. And it's a thing that Knausgaard writes about actually, in My Struggle, that when things are new, right, they have a particular, so when in childhood all of our experiences are new, and he writes, and I still remember it too, like we're about the same age I guess, and specifically things he's like a Slazenger tennis racket,
Right.
like it's been a long time since I thought of Slazenger as but I feel like these very particular things that had such that were almost magical, right? That when you encountered them for the first time, experiences or foods or places, that they impress themselves upon you in a very profound way. Another way of thinking about it, like that thing about time and the Magic Mountain, how the first week takes like 200 pages, and then the next 5 years take 100 pages, and I feel like there's something of that, right? That as you're the walk out is always longer than the walk back because you don't know the way,
Yes. No, it is definitely a time of firsts. And I think in looking at your experiences, you're sort of seeing the world with wonder in these books, which gives it such an aliveness in those the personal essay sections of the book. But on the other extreme, another thing about this book that I just loved so much is the way it takes on death. And I found myself really moved to tears reading about like the death of your father. And I've lost my own father very recently, and I feel, again, that's an example of my taking something from my life and, letting it fuse with yours. But we all are. I said to a friend jokingly, any writer over the age of 50 who's not writing about death, I don't know what they're doing. Like, I mean, like, how is your life like not, Yeah, there could still be Schlesinger, but you're gonna have some death in there somehow. But can it's not just death though, but it's death and consciousness. There's this you marvel, this beautiful passage, how since he's dead now, his memories have dissolved into the ether, and you say, how can it be that all that is in us dies with us? And I think that maybe what I'm saying is it's not so much only really about death, but it's about memory, is a you know a well that you go to again and again. What is it about that?
Well, I mean, it is. I feel like it is. There are things, that I get back to childhood. I feel like since childhood, I haven't really been able to understand that. How can it be that things can be so real and present for me, but unless I articulate them, you won't know about them. So we can be in the same room, I don't know, making salad together, and I can be having this remembering something and having this totally other experience. There was a moment when my grandfather, it was after my grandmother died, and he was sitting in that apartment in the chair by the window looking out to sea. And I thought, oh, he's missing my grandmother. And I said, oh, grand-père, what are you thinking about? And he said, I'm recalling visiting an oil well in the Sahara in 1952. And and I just had this sudden, it was like this sudden little advent calendar window, opening.
Right.
Like, oh my goodness, behind there's all of this life that I will never know. And I think I do think that for me, literature is the sort of the lifeline that can be thrown, as it were, from one place to another. And in that I think it's in the same Kant's little Prussian head, but talking about when I read Tolstoy's childhood, which is his first writing, and it's autobiographical, and I feel like I'm there, and it feels as though it feels to me like a pane of glass that I can almost step through. When I was a kid, I wanted to get inside the paintings. Did you have that ever as a child? Like, if I wish hard enough, can I just get inside the painting?
Go somewhere else. I always feel that's why I've always wanted to write an essay about this, like our fetishization of the miniature, the room of miniature, little rooms at the Art Institute of Chicago or Cornell boxes or whatever it is. It's like we love the idea, or Jeannie's lamp on I Dream of Jeannie when I was a child, like to go into a small space that we couldn't possibly fit into is like an extreme example of going somewhere that you're generally not allowed to go. It's transgressive, I think, in a way. But the idea of going elsewhere, just the power of that is so strong. I think I was thinking you write about one of my favorite novels in here, Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro. And I was thinking about it again right now because the young character's Kath, the narrating the story, is experiencing things, but we kind of start to know more than she does. And there's something so painful in that. Whenever that's happened to me in literature, like in the story Clay by Joyce, where we are aware of something that the character isn't. What is that? What is I mean, this is a real tangent. This is like my thing. Indulge me if you don't mind for a moment, because I think that book that you spend a great deal of time on, and I absolutely love it too. What is that? Why is that it like terrifying in a way?
Well, I actually think one of the things I wonder is whether it's differently. I mean, whether it's more terrifying for somebody like you or somebody like me who thinks of ourselves as astute observers and self-aware and understanding the scene. And do you know what I mean? I think one of the things about being a writer is that you're setting yourself in a particular relation to the world, which is one of curiosity, but also one of sort of detachment or separation, where you think like, okay, I got this. I understand. I'm looking, I understand. And so the idea that you might be totally wrong about that and not understand is a little bit terrifying. I was parking the car yesterday and just caught the beginning of some NPR thing where some group of, I don't know who they are, have announced that there's a 50-50 chance that this is a simulation, that like life is a simulation.
Oh, right.
And I feel like, but I feel like what could be worse than that realization that we're all somebody else's plaything. How terrible. But you know what? That's also generational, because my students, you know,
They all
when
believe it.
they're very unfazed by being manipulated by,
Yeah, they grew up with that kind of technological manipulation just as a, there was an essay a while back, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it was interesting in terms of like being wrong or being found out or being called out on something. This he wrote about sort of somebody sending somebody accidentally sending him an email that made fun of him, that was supposed to be sent to all these other people, but it got sent to him. And he was so it was unbearable to find out that he'd been wrong about something and to be publicly shamed about it. We can't tolerate that, even though we are filled with criticism of other people constantly. It's always in our heads. But when there's a moment when we are found to be wrong and it's publicly acknowledged, it's simply the worst thing. And he was trying to understand why that was.
Do you think, I mean, I don't know if this is related, but so a friend of mine, a friend who's a writer, and we've been friends since college, and she sent me some photos not long ago from back then. And I remembered, when I had forgotten the photos, but when I saw them, I remembered the days they were taken, the situation, everything. But I was also weirdly surprised to be in the photo. It's almost as if like being a witch, I feel like, no, I am, that's my experience.
That's right.
Like I'm
no, the minute you're in the photo, you're vulnerable.
Right.
One day somebody can see it and like, oh, these poor dead people, or no, but not just, but but seriously, you're vulnerable. Like, I feel like people in photos, like, you don't know what's coming, or you don't know what hit you. There's that sense. I mean, it's just about all of us. It's about mortality, I guess. And
I think that thing of public shaming is the same, is that, it's much easier, whatever craziness and neurosis one carries inside, it's easier to feel like I'm dealing with that. I don't have to, surely I don't have to imagine what everybody else might react,
No, it's the specialness and then being toppled from that.
Yes,
absolutely, which we're constantly doing. That actually brings me to, you quote a great line from Philip Larkin: "Life is first boredom, then fear." Where are you in that timeline right now?
I feel like that when you said about hitting 50, I feel like the fear quotient, it's not always fear. I mean, one of the things I feel like I learned through the course of my parents' last illnesses and deaths, which I feel is a sort of, it was like crossing a river, and I look back at the other side and I think, wow, that's so far away. But I learned that there are worse things than death, right? Which my mother had a degenerative neurological disease. She had Lewy body dementia, and my sweet mother was 10 months bedbound, unable to speak before she died. And I feel like when she died, that was better for her.
Right.
So I know, I think it was something I experienced with my father. That one of the nurses in the nursing home kept trying to tell me, but I suddenly sort of understood it, which is there's no way but forward. And given that there's no way but forward, sometimes the best outcome is to be free.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, Lord knows, I'm hoping for some decades yet, God willing. But the fear I have is not about that. In some sense, I fear suffering. But I would say the fear is like greed, and I just want, there's a moment I think I write about it in one of the pieces, where my father, who was in a lot of pain, and he sat up to sit by the window, and I said, "But Daddy, if it's so painful," it was just a few days before he ended up being sent to hospice, and I said, "If it hurts so much, why don't you just stay in bed?" And he said, "I don't want to miss this."
That's right.
This. And I sort of feel some version of that, which is I feel greedy for everything and every day, and in a way avid, and in a way that I feel like at 25 I could spend an afternoon napping and staring at the sky. And I really miss being able to do that. But I feel like there's this time's winged chariot is hurrying near.
My husband and I sometimes joke about when we were like really, really young and just sort of first together and living together, and we would sleep late and we would watch sometimes like at 11 in the morning, like a game show from the 1970s on some channel, like Bumper Stumpers, like the worst piece of shit in the world. Like, what were we thinking? Did we think we would get that hour back? I mean, but it satisfied what it needed to. And at any rate, it became a memory that we joke about now about mortality, because everything now goes for me through the mortality sieve, I think, right? But to its opposite, there's so much in this book about, a defense of literature and all the arts, and not necessarily even a defense against some imagined slight, but a sense of what it does for you. You write about discovering interior worlds, whether reading or looking at a painting or lying and looking up at the sky, as you say. And then you say this great line: there's no clear point to any of these things. They don't make money or burn calories or help you network or make you famous. They make you human. And I got very excited reading that, because I think that is what this book does very much.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm just so I'm so aware. I read another point about letter writing, and it was a big thing in my family when I was young, letter writing, and people obviously we don't do it much anymore. And the thing that was that I, when I think about it, it was something. I feel this about embroidery also.
Yeah.
Like my grandmother, made a trousseau. My French grandmother like embroidered napkins and pillowcases and her nightgowns before she got married, and it's just a huge amount of labor to make something small and beautiful that basically nobody else is ever going to see, right? Like her husband would see her nightgown and nobody else. And what underlies that, which is the same as writing a letter, if I take 3 hours to write a letter to you, just you, Meg, only for your eyes, it's because I am saying you matter and I matter, and the things we have to share matter. And when somebody like my grandmother, who came from a very humble origins, spends that time sewing and to make something beautiful, it's because even though my life is modest, and they were people who through the war didn't have enough to eat, and but she was sewing the trousseau before that, but I'm somebody, my life matters, has the dignity and is worthy of this type of attention. And the thing that I worry about our current society is that we're so distracted by the lives or the images of the lives of others, right? That we come to believe that the small things in our own lives are unimportant, and that taking care of, attending to one another's interior experiences. So much of letter writing is about, what I was thinking. I went to the supermarket, and the guy behind the counter was so nice to me, which he never is. He's usually really grumpy, and that changed my entire day. Right? Like, that's the kind of thing you write in a letter, but you're not going to send a text about that, and you're not going to call somebody on the phone and tell them that.
No. I had a diary when I was a child, and I very dutifully was writing, sort of thinking maybe someday I would be sort of like a lesser known, the Long Island version of the Bloomsbury Set. And I, today I watched Bewitched, but then after a while I got really bored with it and I stopped writing in it. And then I went back, and on all the pages I wrote, nothing happened today, because I had this idea of, posterity. I was 10 years old, this notion of posterity. But there is that sense you can see in some writers in their journals. Like I gave a reading at the Smith College Library, and they invited me into the Plath collection, which was amazing. And I spent a half a day with, these big journals of hers. And some of them really did seem to have been written to be read. They were not merely for the self or for one other person. They had that feeling. When you write, because you and I understand, at least with a little luck, what we write will be published. There's no guarantee moving forward for any of us, but we assume that is true. Not just, one needs to be humble about it. But do you think that's affected writing for you? Knowing that you have a readership, that they are there?
I think it depends what I'm, you know, it depends what. So I think writing fiction, it's not that I think about who might read it, but I think of it being read, if that makes sense.
Right. So you
I,
never really imagine a kind of person who basically would be your friend and isn't you and doesn't know you reading you, who's somebody you would like reading you. You don't have that fantasy in a sense.
not when I'm writing, I don't think. Do you when you're
No,
writing?
I don't either, but I know some people do. Somebody said to me that they felt that they were writing, if they were writing for anyone, it was sort of toward a person who was like them but hadn't had any of their experiences, which seems, a paradox of sorts.
Right, right. I mean, I think it's interesting because the culture, our culture has sort of evolved and changed so much in the last decade, right? With the advent of technology and smartphones and the difference in what stories are or can be, whether they're actually multimedia events online or I mean, I feel like things are very uh, different from the world that we grew up in,
Yeah.
the understanding of stories that we had. And so I think I'm more aware now that my understanding of a story or of storytelling um, seems may seem uninteresting or remote to more and more people. So in that sense, I think I try to reassure myself that there are still people out there who might be interested.
Yeah, yeah. On the other hand, the fact that the world has become small and available to us, and different stories are available, and we can learn so much about people in other cultures and other lives, and is tremendous to me,
Yes.
because it keeps you from feeling that need that I think was sort of like a mid-century male, need to sort of be the book of everything. And of course, it never was. It was sometimes the book of being a mid-century American male, white male. It wasn't that.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of saying, they say to writers, write what you know. I always think it's write what obsesses you. I know I don't know most things. And I want to read widely. I want to read about other people's experiences that have nothing to do with mine. So I sort of, I don't feel that way, as that person said. It's like the reader who is like me. I don't know if the reader needs to be like me, but I just,
I really believe the reader, I mean, from my own experience as a reader, I
yeah.
really believe the reader doesn't need to be like me. I mean, I think, when I recently read Maza Mengiste's novel, The Shadow King, which is amazing. And I feel like, and I was in that world and I felt so intimately connected, particularly to the protagonist he wrote, who's a woman warrior in the Ethiopian battle against the Italians, and I feel like no, that's fairly far from my own experience.
Right.
I don't need, but I think everybody's different, but I certainly don't need to feel um, that I'm reflected in order to feel close to something. But I also think, I mean, on the other hand, just talking about how important it is, the diversity of stories, I think there are a lot of people who have never encountered in fiction. I mean, I feel like when I read Harriet the Spy, I felt like that was me. And I feel like, but there are a lot of people who growing up never had the experience, the gift of reading a character with whom they could identify.
No, it's a powerful, important thing right now, and I'm very, particularly in fiction for young readers, a diversity of experience is a diversity has become like an enormous thing, and it's very, very moving to see that world take that on in such a big way, because early on in childhood, this notion of, what do you connect to in a story? What do you connect to can last your whole life.
Yeah.
I feel right now, sometimes writing a novel feels like putting a message in a bottle. I don't know where it's going to go or who's going to read it, and I have no say over that. Um,
And I think, that is very true. And but I also feel like, isn't that the joy of it?
oh,
I,
absolutely.
I was saying, the fact that I referred to it earlier, this Magda Szabo novel, The
Yeah,
Door,
which I have not read.
it was published in the 80s, and then it was translated by a university press, I think in the early 90s, but wasn't reviewed and wasn't really widely known. And then And then I think it was translated into French, and the French translation won a prize. And then it was translated into English by a Brit and published there, and then taken up by the New York Review of Books.
Yeah. Oh, that series, which you refer to, right, is amazing.
And so they published it here. And so the book was published in the 80s and in, you know, in her native Hungary, right? And here only really in about 2015. And so when I read it, I had this feeling like, oh my goodness, how could I not have known that I didn't even know this writer. I didn't know this writer. And this book is so important to me. And I think that is the message in the bottle thing is when I'm feeling good about the world, I feel like the book that I need will find me, or I will find it at the right time when I'm feeling good about the world, I think.
There is this feeling about certain books that we love in particular, like when you mentioned Enid Blyton and Eleanor Farjeon, the little book room or whatever, like these things that I haven't thought about in a very long time, they awaken certain neurons in you and they connect. But what is it about like loving a book so much that when somebody mentions it, you instantly like that person and you want to talk to that person? Isn't that an amazing thing? It's like a social connection. I feel that way about the novel Mrs. Bridge. It's one of my favorite novels. It's one of my favorite 20th century novels, definitely top 5. And I love it. And people who love it, I wrote an essay about it for the New York Times, and I heard from a ton of people, and they quoted lines that they loved. And there are certain books like that you feel that way about. So they're almost like people, right? That you feel way about.
I certainly feel that about Jane Bowles, who about Two Serious Ladies, which is her only novel, and I feel like I have friends who it does nothing for them, and they say what a waste of time. And then there are other people, you know, I remember discovering that Hilton Alice is one of those people, you know, that he loves Two Serious Ladies, and I almost felt it was like a sort of you know, secret friendship promise with the, you know, let's exchange our blood, you know. I think the less and Mrs. Bridge is the same. They're novels that aren't at the center of the conversation, of the culture. There's certain, and so it's like, it's, you know, it is, I think, you know, my daughter has that with certain indie bands with her friends. I think it's the same, you know, and I remember that from being young, like, you know, that it's like a private language that you find.
And you have to get to it at the right time, because my most bookish friend when I was growing up, Amy Gottlieb, who became a writer, she like pushed certain books on me that I didn't know about. And she pushed Colette's Cherie on me, and I didn't like it. And I was like, what is she complaining about being old, getting old and losing her looks? Like, just darling, wait. Wait. You know, you'll get it. You'll be an aging courtesan one day, and that young lover of yours is not gonna be interested in you. No, I kid, but it was about aging, so much about aging. And I found it so moving when I read it, you know, 30 years, 40 years later even. And it's like that commercial, we will serve no wine before it's time. I mean, it's like, yeah, the book has to find you, or you have to find the book at the right moment, I think.
So true. And I have, you know, I think I said this not long ago. I had this with, you know, I have this in a way with Mrs. Dalloway, which I loved when I was 20, but I feel like, what book was I reading when I was 20?
Right. What did you think? Like, it's about, oh, how sad for this woman. Like, I felt that way, right? About too bad. Like, I felt that way about To the Lighthouse. Too bad Mrs. Ramsey died. I'm not gonna, you know, it's like, yeah, there is that feeling.
You come to it then, you know, in the middle of your life, and you're like, no, yes, I see.
Now, I don't know if we have any questions here. I don't think we do. If anybody wants to ask a question, this might be a good time. Otherwise, we'll just sort of gab a little bit longer. I wanted to ask you something that is really about this moment in time. So when you're feeling good, you said, what about, oh wait, here's a question. Well, let me say that real quick, and you can give me a quick answer to that. So we're in the middle of a pandemic, and you have a book coming out in a pandemic, which is, and you know, your events are, you know, on a screen. Can you feel, I know you said before that you're teaching a lot and you're writing and teaching, but do you need to feel hopeful when you're writing? And if so, is that a big challenge right now, or do you feel it?
I think, so I rewrote the introduction for this book in the spring. It had a different introduction, which was sort of grumpier, and I think I rewrote it hopefully in a more hopeful way. And I would say that actually writing makes me hopeful. That one of the things I feel about this terrible time, I think about so in her late 50s, my mom had breast cancer, and we talked about the fact, like, there was a lot she was unhappy about in her life, and it seemed like, oh, this is a sort of moment. It wasn't, it was, they caught it fairly early. She was in, it was, given that it was breast cancer, it was a pretty good situation, right? And it seemed like this is the moment to rethink everything and make sure that you make the changes you want to make. Well, being my mom, she made no changes at all, right? She made not one change, nothing. So we talked about it. I guess she thought about it. I guess she decided not to, right? Okay. But my point is that this is in our global, I mean, worldwide, certainly in this country, but worldwide, this is such a moment, right? This is a moment of crisis and trauma and transition and change. And out of that, potentially positive things could come, right? As well as all the darkness. And I think that when I read, so I don't know if you joined Yi-Yun Lee's book group, her Tolstoy book group.
No.
So in the spring, through a public space, there was this online book
Didn't
group.
even see it. Wow.
People reading. So I reread War and Peace, which I hadn't read for 25 years, and I found it incredibly consoling. There's the siege of Moscow. People are fleeing the city. They're selling their expensive paintings and furniture for a dime to like catch a ride on a farmer's cart out of town. And I was reading this at the same time as the sort of height of the pandemic, and it's awful. Don't let me like make light of what's going on in the Tolstoy, nor make light of what's going on in the world. But it is also a narrative of extreme and grave crisis that people survived to talk about, right? And to tell the tale. There is an after. If you're telling the tale, there's an after.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I feel about reading, just the sort of corollary there. I feel about reading. I wrote about this. I edited the Best American Short Stories in 2017. And after the election, I still had stories all spread around my room. And I thought, how am I going to go back and picking short stories not about this terrible, I felt, event. And I tried to remember that the reading experiences of the past, I would have those reading experiences again in the future, and that it was important to remember them. And I think that's true for writing and for everything, that you remember the thing that happened before, and you look towards some version of it for the future. So I think that's what we're doing here. Okay, a couple of questions here. Claire, would you be willing to reminisce about writing The Woman Upstairs? How did you come up with the idea, and just how thrilled and horrified were you to come up with the darkly delightful ending?
Darkly delightful. I like that this. Thank you for finding delight in the ending. I know that some people just found dark. That's a novel about a woman in midlife who is lonely and sort of falls in love with a whole family, and things don't work out so well there. But there are several things I would say. It has a rant which about a rant that made a lot of people not care for her as a character, but that came, I think, for me. There were many contributing elements to this character whose name is Nora, and to this story. She, one, I would say I was going through a lot when I was writing it. So I wrote it in the time when I lost both my parents, and they were ill and dying. And I think there was a transference of an intensity of emotion into some other narrative. I had as a sort of distant antecedent notes from Underground, in my mind. And I was interested to read that when he was writing that book, he lost his wife and his brother to tuberculosis in the course of the time he was writing that book. I feel there was a similar sort of that I was channeling a rage against the world in some way that I put into this character. But I think the thing that made me, I feel I can just about say this now that she's been gone almost a decade, but my aunt, my father's sister, who is a character who appears in the course of these essays, was somebody who never married and stayed home taking care of her parents. And my sister and I, before my aunt died, found among my grandfather's books hidden slipped in among them a diary of hers. And she was somebody who had managed to, it was her, we never told her that we had found it. She spent 10 years passionately in love with a married man who lived on another continent. And I was just really interested in, one of the things that's a lifelong preoccupation of mine is what's reality? Is it what's in my head? Is it what's in your head? Is it what's in between? Is there something objective? Right. And the idea that she could spin with like a spider with so few points of contact, could spin so elaborate and prolonged a web, right, was really interesting to me. And the degree to which our interior lives determine our life experience is an abiding preoccupation. So this is the novel is not at all a story about my aunt or her experience, but I think, people said, oh, you wanted to write about being a woman who's single in midlife, and I feel like, well, yes, but really what I wanted was to write about somebody who makes stuff up in their head, who lives a lot in their heads. And if you live with other people, there's usually a reality there's a reality check at some point, right? If you have a roommate who overhears the conversation, they will say, no, he does not like you. Do not get that in your head. He does not like you. Right. But if you're alone, you can just, you can make up your own thing.
Well, thinking of that book reminded me of, you sort of sparked, and I know it's well-trod territory, but you sparked a really great conversation about the notion of likability of characters. You did an interview, and I have the quote here. The interviewer asked you, said, I wouldn't want to be friends with Nora, your character, would you? Her outlook is almost unbearably grim. And you said, for heaven's sake, what kind of question is that? Would you want to be friends with Humbert Humbert? Would you want to be friends with Mickey Sabbath from Sabbath's Theater, Salim Sinai, Hamlet, Krapp, Oedipus, Oscar Wilde, Antigone, Raskolnikov, any of the characters in The Corrections, any of the characters in Infinite Jest, any of the characters in anything Pynchon has ever written, or Martin Amis, or Orhan Pamuk, or Alice Munro, for that matter? If you're reading to find friends, you're in deep trouble. We read to find life in all its possibilities. The relevant question isn't, is this a potential friend for me, but is this character alive? And I was really struck, me, that being alive is the connective tissue in everything that you write in this current book, Kant's Little Prussian Head, and your novels, about the experience of being alive, the now, the moment.
Thank you. I mean, I think, I really believe, I guess what I believe is that almost nobody, maybe there are some people, but almost nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, I am an evil and terrible person. I want everybody to hate me, right? We get up and we think we're doing our best, or we are doing our best, and we have stories that we tell ourselves that make it okay to be alive, right? Even if we're screwing up big time, even if we've made terrible decisions, even if we have grave moral failings, right? We have narratives that make it possible to continue, that even if there's a certain amount of self-loathing, whatever, but we don't, but if you start from that premise that almost everybody is going forward, trying to find a way in which they are an okay human being, then I think you look at people, it's that Chekhov thing. It's not my job to tell you that horse thieves are bad people. It's my job to tell you what this horse thief is like. And so I feel like what I feel about the character Nora, who as that interviewer said, she's so grim. I feel like, no, if you met her at a dinner party, she would seem lovely and polite and charming and somewhat reticent, perhaps, but her turmoil is inside. And back to that thing we were talking about before, each of us is carrying around entire worlds and that color our experiences, and the people we encounter have no idea of. And it seems to me that's where life is, and that's what it is to be alive. And as writers, that's what we're trying to explore, is all of the life that hasn't broken the surface,
I think that's why you responded as you did to Sally Mann's memoir in the book, which you write about, which is just, and that's an incredible piece, because she's been, as you point out, so criticized by a lot of people for writing about, for photographing her children naked when they were young, when they were underage, and she takes that on, and you take that on too. This sort of idea of this woman reckoning with her choices and other people's sense of morality, and saying no, that wasn't my way of seeing it at all.
I feel as though so much, one of the things that's really interesting about the pandemic for me is, you know, when I cut out a certain amount of interaction with the wider world, I'm actually more at peace. So then, you know, when it starts back up, I'm like, I feel sort of assaulted because to be able to you know, sort of think calmly about what you want to do or how you want to spend your time, or have you know, versus how the world interprets that, and society's reactions. I find it really interesting, because I used to say of my father, who was that we told the children to call him Grandpa because he was so grumpy. But I used to jokingly say to my husband, he's unfit for the world. My dad has become unfit for the world. Like he goes to get gas at the gas station and something annoys him. Like he just can't. He just needs to stay home and shut the door. But I feel like for the first time I've been sort of understanding that, because here's a little thing. I know it is totally unrelated, but I actually love getting dressed in the morning, because, and I'm not somebody who's been spending time in my pajamas. I've actually been sort of a little more careful about what I wear, but I get to choose what I want to wear because I like it, not because I'm worrying about whether I'll look sufficiently professional, or, you know, whether somebody will have a certain impression of me. Like, I like just dressing how I want, you know?
That's right. The pandemic has made us sort of like, how do you want to shape your day? If you are somebody who, well, if you're fortunate enough to be able to work at home as I am, and you are right now, certainly many people are not, I feel, you know, and I want to acknowledge that. But how do you want to shape your day if you have the freedom to shape it in some way, is a question that I sometimes don't get to ask myself. I was joking earlier that I feel like, you know, this moment is sort of like an artist colony with trauma. You know, it's like time to work if you're a writer. But I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, people were saying, you know, I'm going to get all this stuff done. I'm going to join, you know, I'm going to bake a lot, whatever. And then somebody wrote an essay in the New York Times, I don't remember who it was, saying, no, that's not going to happen exactly, because you're going to start to know people who died and who lost people who died. And it's not going to feel like it feels right now. Like it started off feeling like a snow day. Right. You know, and it's not going to feel like that. And of course it didn't feel like that. But we have our work, and we have hope, and we have books, which I think for both of us and for so many people out there watching today who are attending this book festival, and thank you to the book festival for hosting Claire today and inviting me to join her. You know, books matter. And I think your book makes the case absolutely persuasively, as if we needed the case. But art and seeing the world in a certain way, and reading, and that kind of connection that we do with the quiet or loud voices on the page that we meet. And that's certainly true. I felt in here, you know, even especially actually when you wrote about something that I had not read, a book that I had not read, or a reference I did not know, I particularly wanted to read it. And then I made you know, and I will read it. When you mentioned this book, Changing Your Life Is at the Door, I was like, wow, how that changed her life. That's not nothing to say something like that. And I think that's what we long for in what we read, and what we need now more than ever, which we always say, like, this is the most important election of your lifetime, or we need art now more than ever. But it's always true, and it is really true now.
It is really true now. It's really true now. And can I just say, I can't thank you enough, Meg. You know, for this hour of conversation, it's such a joy to speak with you, whom I love and whose work I love and admire so. And I want to thank the festival for giving me this chance to talk with you. It's really been great. I thought as you were speaking, you know, that I would just share the epigraph to the book, which is from Louise Gluck's poem October. You are not alone, the poem said. in the dark tunnel. And I feel like it's true.
It is so true. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I cannot think of a better way to have started the last day of the festival this year. This was an incredible hour and so thoughtful. Meg, thank you for your incredible questions, and Claire, your answers were beautiful. I think we came up with a new tagline for the book festival when you said, I matter, you matter, and the way I want to get the quote right, I wrote it in the chat. Sorry, it's I matter, you matter, and the things we have to share matter. And this is a perfect example of that, and thank you so much for this book and for this conversation. Meg, good luck on your travels today, and Claire, best of luck with this book. We will be back in about a half an hour with Jennifer Palmieri for her book She Proclaims. We hope to see all of you watching at home, watching again. And I hope to see Claire and Meg when we can gather in person. You have an open invitation to come to Madison and have another conversation. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.